So we have another rocking crowd today, which is normal, but we actually have some followers here as well. Thank you for coming. I'm not going to give a traditional introduction and tell you how many books Colette Inez has or any things about her impressive and long that you can see on this poster. Instead, I'm going to give the same introduction I gave you the other day in class, if you weren't in class, my class. I said over 20, I want to thank first the student activities and Dave Eng for making this reading possible. But of all the writers, and I think I counted, so I was wrong, I have probably 130 writers that I brought in since I started teaching at STAC. All kinds of people from psychology, people who wrote about psychology, educators, fiction writers, journalists, investigative reporters, poets, historians, of all those people. And my wife and I often talk about this because we sometimes get to take people to dinner. The nicest, the kindest person has been Colette Inez. And I mean this in all sincerity. I'm not saying that to inflate Colette Inez. I'm saying we get to meet people and go to dinner with people. Dr. O'Neill's been to some of those dinners and other professors here. And I say this in her kind of caring and insightful comments, the way she's willing to share her work, unparalleled. And so that's my introduction for Colette Inez. I hope you listen. Thank you.
Oh, this is a generous introduction, and I'm listening, and I'm glad to be here. And I want to thank Jerry for bringing me Professor McCarthy, who is also a very fine poet, I might say. And I want to thank Thomas Aquinas College, and all of you for coming, or for how many of you were here. And I want to thank my husband. Of now 50, we celebrated 50 years, not, as I said, not a marriage in trouble. And my husband brought me here from over the bridge from Manhattan to Orangeburg. But are we in Orangeburg? Okay, wherever. And I'm going to be starting out with a few poems that are not in Luba, just a kind of little comfort zone. And then I'm going to enter and introduce you to Luba. The first poem is going to be a poem of transformation, sort of like the Kafka novel where he wakes up and he's a cockroach. This is one where a woman wakes up and she's a bicycle. It's called Two-Wheeler Spins. She wakes up and she's a bicycle, streamlined at last. Bicycles are naturally anorexic. Sometimes her husband pats her seat. Sex is not out of the question. They're not a run-of-the-mill couple. She wakes up, and she's a rowboat, sturdy in the water. The couple she carries are her parents, red-faced and exhausted after sex. She drifts in silence, heavy with their regret. Or she wakes up and she's a door, leaning against the bicycle she once was, or a boat. How to keep her husband in this picture alert? He pulls out a key, they're face to face, remembering excursions inside their rooms. The parents live quietly in picture frames. My next poem will be a city poem, and it's a city poem that comes from looking in city windows, you know, and looking to see what the signs are, what's happening. And one time I was working in Upper New York, and I saw a sign in a beauty parlor that said, "Good news, Nilda is back." So, you know, if you're a writer, you want to know where Nilda's been and why it's good news, and etc. So this is a poem, an old poem, but one is still a favorite with me, and it's called Good News. Good news, Nilda is back. The sign huzzahs in the beauty shop as the rain combs the sky over and over like a grandmother combing the hair of a child. Impermanent waves of rain on the street, the trees are straight and the city bends, but Nilda is back from Guayaquil, Quito, Ponce, San Jose to tease the gringo smiles of blue-eyed wives in the reigning city. And now she cha-chas up the aisles to supervise the upswept lines of an aging lady who does not know why Nilda comes or why she goes or where her hair uncurls at night, damp at the edge from waves of love. And I go from Nilda now to entirely different poems. I like to range around in my poetry, and Saul and I have become members of the Amateur Astronomy Society. So this is a poem for neutrinos, which are actually small, little weightless subatomic particles pouring from the sun, and they're sort of billions and trillions of, in this very moment, pouring through us, invisible, and passing through our bodies every second. So this is called Neutrinos, and then I'll introduce you to Luba. Neutrinos rush through the dribble of peach at the baby's lips, bowls of pabulum raisins and milk mixing with grit from the split of beginnings. Race to our shadows, they drift towards the teeter-totter mounted in the yard. Unseen, they'll propel through that baby grown stooped, quaint with her worm brown spots and wisps of fur. They'll speed past as she tracks powdery stipples in the telescope, and lulled by dust from the blaze of our star, will have blinked away our names, changed in a web of spinning jots. You, me, them, it. And now we get to, I'm gonna lift her up and show you. This is Luba. Luba is actually, I guess I have to introduce her as a kind of a alter ego, another Colette, but somebody invented, imagined, somebody who is bubble world, surreal, who I kind of throw things on her, I invest in her, I dream of things for her, and this tells you a little bit about her name. So this is the first poem in the book, The Lost Name. When the name Luba lifts away like a leaf in hard rain, or goes missing from its cage, a parakeet not answering, or a scrap of light snagged by a cloud, it must puff up by desire of the one who calls, yet may mosey like a sailboat with the tide to dock at last on the tongue, or simply pop a cork, a bottle cap, Luba, a candied apple at a carnival, Luba, Baba, pop-up tart, mon amour. In the next poem I play, you can see how I like to play with sounds, and here I'm playing with the letter N, and I'm enclosing the names, or including the names of poets whose last names end in N. And you'll see that I mention Emily, but not Dickinson, although her name ends in N. That's my only little trick, that I say Emily, but not N. And I have Luba loves. This is called noting names. Luba loves names whose, beep, beep, I start again. Luba loves poets whose names end on N. Sexton, Swenson, Human, and Stein. When she sings her praises spin, who cares that the physics teacher said a spoonful of dwarf matter equals the weight of a limousine? Didn't Emily say it's so unkind of science to go and interfere? Didn't she say I had been hungry all these years, my noon has come to dine? Love makes Luba light a paper boat in a frangipani scented mist, where bubbles swim, casting their lot with the flow downstream. Clifton, Pastan, Mona Van Dyne race along the waves. Luba blots out the pretended N in Luban, her known identity named by the pull of the tide, the unlettered sun. And this is a poem in which Luba actually becomes a horse. Since she's anything I want her to be, since I can invent, I can have her riding, or you kind of think of her as a horse. And the idea came from looking at the sky and looking at Gemini, and Gemini has Castor and Pollux, the Greek mythological figures, and Castor was a horseman, and Pollux was a boxer. But anyway, you will see that I play around a little bit with this strain. This is a weird poem. Solstice Child. Born to the summer, she is a guest of Castor and Pollux, horseman and boxer. She gallops past arenas filled with lovers. They clock her speed. Red bee-balm, silver rod in the garden. Summer is ailing, waxweeds wrinkled purple pink, low pulse of roses. She calls, but her sires won't nod and shine afar, like a snowfield wedged high in the mountains, whose horses are clouds, lightweight champions of longing. And this is Luba, and the question of fame. I think we live now, particularly in a world where everybody is famous. So I've forgotten who said, maybe it was Yoko Ono, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. Anyway, so she's mulling about fame, and people in the past who were famous were Confucius and Lao Tzu. So let me just wing it with Luba mulls about fame. Maxine Cuman is well known. We lost Maxine last year. But Maxine Cuman is well known, but not as much as Lao Tzu, whose mother kept him in her womb 62 years. He had white hairs when he was born. Lao Tzu was famous, but so was Kung Tzu, philosopher of the middle way, and neither had heard of Socrates, who envied Solon, giver of laws. Lao Tzu's mother waited more than a year for her figure to return. So long, she said, and didn't wave. Any way you figure it, Erica Jong is about as well known as Maxine Hong Kingston. Neither dined with Deng Xiaoping, who looked up to Henry Kissinger. Henry's mother taught him German in her womb. He had an accent when he was born and was destined to be known. I'm having a lot of fun there because Deng Xiaoping was very short, and Henry Kissinger, I think came to the United States when he was about 13, 14, but he never lost his accent. He was always, you can still hear him. He's still going strong at 90. This is a poem that has Luba a little more. She's a little more real now. She's a little more like a person. I have her in South Central Ohio. She's staying with a teacher who loves jazz, and she's in kind of farm country. It's in New Concord, Ohio. Past the chimney, small hawks rode the thermals. Luba looked out on a dark too early for Jupiter. Though she craned her neck, she wasn't sure how the coming occultations of its moons, Europa and Ganymede, figured in. Projected lights on a dome devised her city vista of stars. A stranger to barnyards and orchards in the low blue TV glimmer in villages that once sold coal and red clay pots. She only guessed at the refuge he took in birds, star lore, and myth. What silences from the past he filled with sentences. Stroking his cat, Dizzy G, red as his breeze-filled hair, she imagined the wind lifting her up and plucking her down next to 3 meadowlarks pecking for worms. And downwind from Zanesville, muted light, where Billie's gardenia, the moon, frazzled blue jazz in riffs over the river. I'm sure, I think Billie's now coming back, she's on Broadway, but maybe some of you remember that she had a white gardenia. In some of her pictures, you'll see Billie. If you don't know Billie Holiday, you're missing one of the great singers of all time, a great jazz singer. Well, this is a high school poem. Luba's high school, sort of partly me too. She's in love at the death of a classmate. It's a lot of dances in the gym, and the poem has a little shaking, not shake and bake, but just shaking. Cadenzas for Johnny. His green eyes blinking when he zoomed in for a kiss. Disco, jazz, twist, funk, they shook. She woke tasting the smooth print of his lips, fractured melodies, vanished refrains. A year later, his mother's cry, like a shard of glass, splintered in the room where schoolmates clustered around his casket. Johnny's photograph glowed on Luba's dresser, like a votive candle. Through the shutter of the house, a muffled heart and soul. Plump, bump-de-bump from a neighbor's whoopee room piano. Notes drifting over onion fields plowed under, and the bloom of cookie cutter houses in a history of back and forth gyrations, the floodlit gym floor grooving and hopping. That was a pre-Levittown time. This is a quieter poem. Luba goes to the dentist, and I had a poem where Luba gets driving lessons, but I took it out. I thought I'd just have to go to the dentist. And this is a root canal dentistry in which I imagine the dentists as aliens, and we're looking out on Central Park. It's called Maxillary Coordinates. The sky's blue mouth says, open wide. Snow like crushed aspirin or patches of gauze in a view of the park. Masked, gloved space aliens, one on either side, he hammers and drills. She stands by. They want Luba's abscess root to show on Pegasi 51. The man in white repeats, you're doing well. He has learned our language. Advisory charts appear in the recovery room. A buzz of talk and they depart, their ship to lift off after dark. Buildings with needles subdue the sky, lost in a swollen haze of nitrous oxide and novocaine. She seeks out the square of Pegasus, a western edge of stars, white as porcelain chips. Now I'm going to read you another a star poem. This is one in which I love the name of the star. It's called Fomolo, or I thought it was called Fomolo. Fomolo, and you can check it out because it comes out around autumn when the leaves turn color. If you look in the southern horizon low, you see this really bright star, and there's no bright stars around it. And so it's been called the solitary one, and it's sort of in the southern fierce Pisces Australis. But anyway, it's sort of extraordinary. And when I was teaching uptown, I used to kind of look over past the library, and there was Fomolo So, but I never told anybody about my feelings about Fomolo. And then somebody said, well, it's not pronounced Fomolo, it's pronounced Fomolat. So that kind of changed the whole, my heart sunk, because, and that's how my poem begins. She used to say, and I have Luba saying this, she used to say Fomolo until corrected. No, it's Fomolat. A sound not so alluring, that long terminal O. October, molecules of student backpacks, cell phones, laptops, Broadway, Manhattan, once a glacial field, a terminal moraine, all descended from star grit. Her breath may or may not fan the smoke of words. Fading through doors are waves of things said that have their residue of concerns. Luba gazes up at the southern fish, invisible constellation, setting down its kettle of fire. Fomolat, the solitary one, 17th among the 20th brightest stars. And I have there's a couple of sexy poems coming up, and this is one I think is about having sex outdoors and sort of at the beach, and it's also I think partly prompted or inspired by reading Molly Bloom's soliloquy in James Joyce's Ulysses, but not really. It's just I use the word knickers in the first stanza, and knickers is not the golf outfit, golf pants, but knickers is really underwear, sort of English or Irish for underwear, underpants. So this is called Windlust. She'd take him, blindfold him, fold him in her knickers, say she was knocked around and didn't get what others took handily. And in the middle of fog, dissolving over dunes, that long moan when they rolled apart, face up under the hum of drifting in the fees grip crunch of their last bang. Meanwhile, entropy, a papal astronomer, pi r squared, mathematician, intoned omniscience, discourse of solar instruments, wind propellers, pipes, hovers, mills, windrows. Luba remembers mounting a runty boy with fat yellow hair, pounding his bones, wind-blasted, exhausted at the sea's edge, high in the spasm of stellar waves. It's fun to write poems like that. Here's another one. This one takes place in Las Vegas, where I have been to Vegas, but I didn't have the Luba's experiences in Vegas. I played the one-armed bandit and lost a little money. This is a fun poem too. You can listen to the rhymes, off rhymes. It's a very musical poem. Vegas variations. Love pumped and revved her passage into Zoom. $1,000,000 miles she clocked, motel-wise, in a rotary room. Sun her pinball light up, ringing in a distant prize until the road slammed down an end to batteries of praise, and fury steered her sputtering, crashing head-on to the wreck she never reckoned on. End of trek. Except the neon stuttering, the slot machine and turnpike bar swerve on. Like the moon June jackpot of dicey days. In the meantime. And this is the other sex poem. The other sex poem asks you to remember, not many will remember this, that there used to be phone booths in Manhattan, in New York, and you could go in and make phone calls in the booths. Anyway, it was also in New York, a lot of hookers would make phone calls for their johns, and arrangements would be made in phone booths. So my poem is Luba imagining, she's not doing it, she's imagining being a hustler on a night of the full moon. In a vandalized booth, She waits for the man. Connections to begin as the moon plugs into the sky, banging away its unpaid light. A start is a start. Now down her drain, the gurgling dark, moonlight on the sinks, cockamamie porcelain, cock a whistle in her mouth and blow for help. The evening's cop has got a stick. A Con Ed gimmick, says her John, sizing up the moon. Zip, zip, 3 bangs and a squirt. Fate moans, she hums at the moon between each trick. That's it, guys. That's it. I have just a few more, and then I'm going to read you the end poem, and we'll do some questions. This is a more stylish, nicer poem, and it's sort of Florida, and it came from a friend of mine who lives in Delray Beach, who sent me pictures of the society page from Palm Beach. So it's called Society Shots, and I try to use sort of styles and names of designers, and you'll see, you'll hear. Society Shots. A brimmed concoction in fluted chiffon above a lacquered face, doted on by a Lothario in a shell pink suit. Luba tata, Luba tido. Front row seat in Florida, rich in condos, Cuba Libras, margaritas, spas and lounges. Credit cards fly like jeweled birds out of bags, fashioned by Versace, Oscar de la Renta. Daiquiris tip into plump pink lips that chatter while the sun and moon rattle. Charity balls, the smart set, great age, gracefully in Armani jackets. How beautiful in Florida to wear a froth of green, netting in your hair, and to match it into a see-through dress, the color of a wave about to break into foam. Anyway, I'm just going to read you now a poem which is purely, it's a change of pace really. It's based on the name of a great pianist really. The difference between piano player and pianist, as you all know. And Yehudi Menuhin was a famous piano player in the 1940s and 50s, international. And of course, what attracted me in the poem, not so much his piano playing or his music, but the name Menuhin has menu, M-E-N-U, and hin in it, and I could fool around with that. So, and I have Luba fool around with the name. So this is called Luba Looks at a Menu and Thinks of Music. Menu, menu, Yehudi Menuhin, minuet in a minute, Yehudi, who the man that made you the hoodoo, yeah. How many hands in two handsome impresarios, Rio de Janeiro, Portuguese pianos, menus in Brazil, yehu, yehu ye, hoody hoody, hoody hoo, Luba. And I think this is, this is my last Luba poem. But not my last Luba, but last in the book. And this plays a little Ella Fitzgerald, just a little bit of scat towards the end, although I can't really do scat, but I love Ella Fitzgerald. And this is, Luba has become kind of, at the end of the book, she's become a much more confident person. She's sort of singing gospel. She's not quite Mahalia Jackson, but she's full of richness and feeling. And so that's the voice of this last poem, big bosom poem. The singers, the birds had learned to speak in tongues and were saved. They sang to choristers who swayed like trees in the rush of huzzahs before rain crashed down and lightning hopped its peg-leg dance. Hey, hey, the hey. My voice climbed ladders rung by rung. I was saved. Trees plucked me up to their green fold. We sang Glory Wawa to the highest bird lit by the sun. Stones applauded from the streams. Clouds leaned in, gathered that dark, where singing comes from. Do-ba-dee-da, do-ba-da-dee. That's it, thank you. I thought maybe we have, well, I did have one, I had one more song, but I thought maybe I'd take a few questions and then maybe give you my song, the words to the song. It's not a Luba song, but there's some questions that, I know some of you might want to know how I write, when I write, or some questions about Luba. There are no silly questions, they're just questions. Yes, my dear.
When did you start writing about Luba?
What do I think about it?
When did you start writing?
Oh, I started a couple of years ago. I was standing next to the bed in our bedroom. Well, and I was, you know, and I suddenly, the name kind of things pop into your brain, and I heard on this side of my head, I heard Luba, and it was, I'm not at all spooky or seance driven, but it was powerful. And I think I wrote it down somewhere, and I knew that I had to put that somewhere in a poem. And then it began to grow. And I began to think about using Luba as for my other, and putting my voice into Luba. That's it. Does it work for you?
Yeah,
okay.
I like it a lot. Yeah.
And another question about, yes?
Who has influenced you as a poet?
Well, I think the one that I give some tribute to, I started out, you know, writing first I called them the tambourine poets. Everything rhymed, and I wasn't quite sure about all that. And then I came across Walt Whitman, and I saw these big boots, and I was walking around. I felt that he was extraordinarily great, and I was very moved by Whitman. And then I went back, and I thought that began to see Emily Dickinson was more peculiar than I thought. That she was not just a quaint old lady, but she was really brilliant. And so Emily was one of my early poets. Then later on, I turned to a poet who I didn't understand, but I loved, and that was Wallace Stevens. I loved him because he had this great imagination, and anything was happening, and there were jars in Tennessee, and I would be teachers asking me to explicate this poem, but I would have a visual image that was jar and Tennessee, and I was doing my own association. So I love poetry, I love language, and I loved things made visible. I could sort of see things better and understand them better through poetry. So, a long answer, but you know. Any other?
Do you get up in the middle of the night when you're when inspiration
that's an interesting
hits?
question. I used to do that, but it's very, very bad. You become, you know, if you're slightly insomniacal, and I used to be, then you don't go back to sleep. But I used to have a dream book. And I would put, you know, I would try, and I couldn't remember, but I would get up in the middle of the night and I'd say, oh, there's a power, and I'd have a pad next to the bed, and I'd write down part of the dreams. And then I realized I couldn't catch all the dream. Then I would just put down the dream nouns and the dream verbs. And then when I woke up, try to put it together again. And I realized it was very iffy, but still it gave me some sort of idea. Because dreams, the unconscious is also part of being a poet and sort of being able to pull up stuff from there, that strange, surreal world that comes from the unconscious. Yes, my.
So with the inspiration for these Luba poems just come spontaneously to you, just an everyday activity?
Yeah, I don't like to do things every day. I try to be involved with other people's poetry every day, but I might write, it's interesting, that question, because I was talking to a poet friend. He said, you know, Louise Gluck, who's now a very famous, established poet, she doesn't write for years at a time. She may go a whole year and then write her book at over a month. Well, I couldn't live like that. poetry is simply part of my life, and it's part of my thinking, and I'm walking around and I think of a line, I think, oh, that poem, I could go back and see if I can do something with that poem. So poetry for me is a constant kind of static, something in the back of my head, music that I can't live without. And I couldn't be so disciplined as to go a year. I would feel like my radio set was turned off, you know, it's just kind of a dead, you're living by, I see Jerry nod, are you the same thing?
Probably, I think you're right. That's good, that's a good point.
Yeah, I have to kind of read it. And it was a wonderful poet, Stephen Dunn, who was got a Pulitzer Prize, and he's really an excellent poet. But he would come up and he would go to Yaddo, and he would do his sort of year's poetry in a month. Or he would do most of it, his writing and his revising. And so poets have different ways of doing it. And of course, some people just wait for something to drop down, and you hope that the poem will get all written. But that rarely happens, you know. But I get first lines that way. Some people can just come down, and you get the first line, then you hope like hell to get the second. A lot of you know what that, you're all right. I can see by your faces, some of you are writing poetry or have written poems.
Do you ever go back and once a poem is published, do you ever go back and redo it?
Oh, yes, that's very interesting. And, you know, going back to revise, because you know, a lot of poems I go back to that I wrote when I was in high school. So I said, oh, I could do so much better than that. But I tend to resist that, because I want my energy to go into newer work. And if you're looking for the perfection of the past, it's going to be very hard to find that. And so you have to fight it, and not go, yeah.
You said that Luba, towards the end of the book, changed her personality. Her self-esteem got
better. Oh, I'm
better.
glad you saw that.
Did you purposely do that, or did you just find that through the poems?
I think what I did, it's when you're putting together a book, it's different than you're writing the poems. I think when I'm writing the poems, I wasn't thinking of evolving Luba, but as I put the book together, I began to see that she was getting more confident, that she was becoming more of a, I don't know, more solid. And then that last one, she's really coming from a deep place, and sort of, I sing. So I think some of these things are unconscious, but in putting a book together, you're more aware of that unconsciousness, you know. But I'm glad that you noticed it, because I was hoping my readers would notice that there's a change in Luba, that she's not all just weird, frisky, you know, out there.
Do you think of Luba as a real person? You're talking about her as though she were real?
Yes, because it's interesting. She's sort of real. She's like a sister. Mm-hmm. She's me, and I can see that some of my quirks and some of my longings are in her. And you know, I have her in the book. I didn't read the poem, but she loses a mother early, and so I don't make much of it, but that's part of Luba. So there are little biographical facts of Luba.
Part of Colette too.
That get in there, yeah. But she's unmarried. She doesn't have a soul, a good mate. She's restless. She's hopping. You know.
She's still looking.
She's looking. Yeah, she's looking. I don't know if she may have found religion at the end. I don't know, but I haven't. I mean, that's not me. Right? But maybe just a couple of. Thank you in the back there. Any of you guys have anything? Or maybe you just came in. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Should I just read my one song?
Sure.
Yeah. This is not a Luba poem, but it was a poem that. Let's see. Yeah. This is a poem that was written. It was written at one of those wonderful residencies that poets get to go to that have lakes and beautiful rooms and mansions, and it's called Lake Song. And the poem got published, and a composer wrote to me and said, "I'd like to write a song to your poem," and then he wrote the song and published the song. And then it was picked up by the Milwaukee Women's Choir, and I have a record of it. So it was very nice to see a poem evolving into a disc, and a check for $26. So you can see how rich you can get in poetry. But anyway, it's a poem called Lake Song, and it has rhymes, but very subtle rhymes. Lake Song. I'm going to get nearer here. Every day our name is changed, say stones colliding into waves. Go read our names on the shore, say waves colliding into stones. Birds over water call their names to each other again and again to say where they are. Where have you been, my small bird? I know our names will change one day to stones in a field of anemones and lavender. Before you read the farthest wave, before our shadows disappear in a starry blur, call out your name to say where you are. Thank you very much.